Let's get started with today's webinar. Today's webinar is COVID-19, how we're moving forward. That feels so good to say, moving forward. I'm your host, Janet Barker Evans, and Brookdale residents were among the first group to receive COVID-19 vaccines, and their acceptance rate was 93% as of April 23rd this year. So while helping to protect our residents and associates remains a priority, we're looking ahead to a recovery phase. And in this webinar, a roundtable of Brookdale experts are going to reflect on how the pandemic affected our communities and how we're moving forward in the months to come. So in addition to being here on Zoom, we're also simulcasting with Facebook Live. And before I introduce you to our speakers, let's just take a minute to talk about how you can interact with us during the webinar, okay? Now, things are different from computer to computer, but if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you're seeing this webinar, you'll see some icons. The one on the far left is usually a microphone. Now, we've muted your voice, so there's no background sound, but I'll explain how you can ask questions or ask for technical help. With the other buttons, the most important ones are Q&A and chat. When you click the Q&A button, a window will appear where you can type any questions you have for our Q&A session at the end. If you're on Facebook, just drop your questions into the comments section and we'll see them there. And please feel free to start asking questions at any time in the presentation. You don't have to wait, right? They start piling up and we see them, and we're going to get to as many questions as we can. Now, the chat button on Zoom is going to open a window where you can chat with the presenters or our moderator. If you're having any technical difficulties, let us know and our moderator will help you if they can. And then after the webinar today, you're going to get a follow-up email with all of this information, as well as a recording of this webinar so you can refer to it later or you can share it with your friends and loved ones. Ready to go? All right, let's jump in to meet our speakers. Carol Cummings, Kim Elliott, Juliet Holklinger, and Sarah Terry. First, Carol Cummings is the Brookdale Senior Director of Optimum Life Engagement. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks for having me.
Kim Elliott, Brookdale Senior Vice President of Clinical Services. Hello, Kim.
Hello.
Juliet Holklinger is Brookdale Senior Director of Dementia Care. Welcome, Juliet.
Hi, Janet.
And last but not least, Sarah Terry is Brookdale Senior Vice President of Resident and Family Engagement. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, everyone. So we are talking about a pretty big change in society happening right now, right? Let's get past this, the recovery moment. So Kim, let's start with you. Was there a moment during all of this that felt like a big turning point in 2020?
Yes, and I remember distinctly when that moment was, and it had to be when the vaccines came. After such an intense year, we were so excited to get those vaccinations and to have our clinics in our communities. And we started that in December. And even after the first clinics, whenever they got that second dose and we knew that they were fully vaccinated, that was the turning point. And it was the faces of our residents and the pictures that we would see coming in and how excited they were after such a tough year for them. So that was probably the most rewarding part of the entire process.
That's great. And this is a question for the whole panel. Do any of you want to describe the atmosphere in the communities when we began that rollout? You know, how excited were they? How apprehensive? And how has it been changing as vaccines are now more widely available and accepted?
You know, Janet and everyone, as we knew before, our residents are full of wisdom. That generation, the generations we're currently serving have been through a lot. They've been through communicable disease and vaccines, and they led the way. As Kim described, there was hope. We actually have a campaign we call Shot of Hope, and our residents really led the way with that of being so pleased and proud. I think of Edna, one of our 102-year-old residents, who actually had survived the Spanish flu when she was 18 months old, and then got the COVID-19 vaccine shot. And I'll never forget all of us looking at her face and how proud she was to be one of the vaccine recipients and leading the way. Again, our residents are full of wisdom, and they certainly led the way, and the atmosphere in the communities was one of hope and relief, right? As Kim said, a year like we've never seen, right? Hope, relief, and a look to the future.
That's great. And seniors really led the way. Actually, we have a video, I think, ready to go with our first resident vaccine, right? Can we show the video real quick?
I felt honored that they gave me the shot first. For me, there was no discussion and no decision because I was willing to take it as soon as it would come out. I've never had a reaction, and I put my faith in the scientists. It was like sitting on top of a mountain and enjoying yourself. My heart's beating like that. First time I met my girlfriend, I was thinking. I didn't feel a thing. It did a very nice job. I hope people realize that they have to do this to beat this thing. And I believe everybody should have it.
That's great, Frank. That's awesome. That's great. Just the joy, right? The joy of being able to see the end of this whole pandemic. So, Juliet, let's turn to you really quick. You know, one thing this pandemic really did was put a spotlight on our seniors, right? In so many ways. So what good do you think has come out of that, this like focus on the senior members of our society, and what opportunity do we have here to kind of educate people?
Yeah, you know, as a gerontologist, I was just fascinated. I mean, it was a stressful year. It was an intense year, as Kim said, but I think there were some silver linings. And certainly, you know, I was really fascinated by the fact that the country's attention for once turned to older adults and their well-being. And every night on the nightly news, we were talking about, hey, you know, make sure your neighbor, I mean, still to this day in Chicago, we're talking about helping older adults get to vaccination clinics, and there's PSAs on the news. You know, that's just really unprecedented for our society to kind of wake up and realize, there's a lot of older adults living in my community. There's older adults that live in assisted living. There's older adults that live in nursing homes. And guess what? Those two things are different. So I think it was a silver lining of the pandemic that the country's attention really turned to the well-being of older adults.
Yeah, to your point, even people in your own neighborhood, right? You suddenly remember, look, you have to help them with some grocery shopping or whatever. Like suddenly, you know, it like brought it to the forefront, which was so nice. Oh, we got some pictures here.
It's just great.
These are great pictures.
It reminds us how far we've come, actually. These pictures,
I
ladies,
know,
I don't know
right?
about you, it reminds us how far we've come because friends and families are now visiting and hugging all across the country thanks to the vaccines. These pictures are where we've been, and now we're in the future, in the next phase of the pandemic. But these window visits became very popular, right? Look at that great visit. But now we're hugging and connected live, which is really a great thing.
Yeah. And how great that we were able to have window visits, right? How great that we were able to make some of those accommodations. And Sarah, since you brought that up, I'm actually going to toss the next question to you. When it comes to senior living specifically, what are your thoughts about some of the good that's come out of this and this national focus on senior living?
Well, Juliet hit a phrase that we've used a lot. We call them COVID silver linings. And I think particularly in senior living, we had an opportunity to really educate the consumer, the general public, on what senior living really is, from independent living to assisted living to memory care to skilled nursing, to our home care, right? To all the different things that happen for our older adults. And so it was really an opportunity to educate. And because, as Juliet mentioned, the focus was finally on the older adult. It was a great, you know, how sometimes in a crisis, the timing is right to capture people's attention and help them understand. So we really think that was a silver lining. The other thing is it reinforced the power of community. We have communities, right? And the power of community, our residents, our associates, our families, our business partners, all working together. They were working well before the pandemic, but nothing like through the pandemic. And we had to solve quickly. We had to read. Kim's team, I think, read more than they've ever read in their entire life to try to keep up with the ever evolving guidance, right? Just as many of you on this call, I'm sure, are still continuing to keep up with the guidance and what's what's the latest? So really that silver lining of the power of connections, communities, relationships, and that our associates are heroes, our residents are heroes, and that whole topic, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, of the idea of our associates were essential before the pandemic, but the power of really understanding how essential they
Yeah.
were, because sometimes they're already the extension of a family member, but during the pandemic, when it was window visits or technology connection, that the relationship between the associates and our residents became even more powerful than ever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that community made a big difference, right? All of those
Right.
people made such a big difference in the lives of everyone living there.
Yes.
And I know there was a lot of different social engagement stuff that happened in our communities. It was a lot different because of this, but we're still able to do it, which was great.
I will say that's another great point, Janet. The creativity, we always feel like, there's so much creativity going on in our communities. We saw creativity like we've never, ever, ever seen before. We say engagement is more important than ever. One of the things we did a national poetry contest during the middle of the pandemic as well. And the poems that the residents wrote, of course, the reflections on COVID-19 won the contest naturally. But just the creativity that came out of our residents and associates during the pandemic to stay engaged was tremendous.
And I know you mentioned Kim and everything Kim had to read and learn about, right? So much. But we also recently learned that you and other company leaders were partnering directly with the CDC to provide insight into senior living. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process? What kinds of questions did they have, and what really seemed to kind of surprise them?
Sure, and it was a privilege. I'd never worked that closely with the CDC, so I was so impressed because they wanted to learn, they wanted to understand, they wanted to hear the concerns. So knowing you had a partner was just phenomenal, because we could ask questions. Why this, why that. The one thing that I think I really learned through the process too is how much information they had coming at them. You think about changing directions and they say this and now this. Well, if you were getting that many studies from that many areas every single day, trying to organize and look at them, you would understand why there would be switch in guidance, because the new information would come in. So, really getting the understanding of our setting, what it was like, as Sarah mentioned, but then also what are the challenges of the residents? How does this impact everything from their dining to their programming, to their lives, to their relationships with their families, to their quality of life. And I think understanding the challenges that we had was probably something that, I have to commend them for asking the question and wanting to learn it, but then just to have the opportunity to really kind of be an advocate for the residents as they were going through this time.
Yeah, you're right. It's complicated. There's so many different layers to it that no one probably considered ahead of time as everything was evolving. So that's great.
Yes.
Sarah, back to you really quick. So when you think about CDC guidance, all of that established protocols that we have, how did Brookdale build on the established protocols we have for like flu season or other crises?
Mm-hmm. So one of the beautiful things about Brookdale is we have a lot of expertise and a lot of experience. We've been around and serving older adults and their families for over 40 years. And think wildfires, think hurricanes. We did have a snowstorm in the middle of this little pandemic as well. Uri came to land. I think it was a 100-year snowstorm, if I recall. So we also have that size and scale with not only our internal expertise, but our business partners, that we partner with for supplies and all the things we had to do. So we have strong protocols, and Kim's clinical team with infection control protocols and policies and environmental standards. Those are part of our everyday world at Brookdale. So we really just built upon that very strong foundation. And then, as I said before, we learned, we evolved, we asked for help, we got it, we clarified, we put in new, one of the first things that Kim did was send out pulse oximeters in the early days of the pandemic. You may remember the talk about pulse oximeters. We had those in the communities faster than anybody. Kim made that decision very early on, which is a really wise decision. And so we built on our existing foundation of emergency management and really overlaid the pandemic. And we continue to do that to this day, because as I said earlier, we've moved forward a lot. The protocols, are changing and evolving, and we're easing restrictions based on the local, state regulatory or CDC guidance. But we really just used that foundation and then built upon it with all the different channels that we had to address, from PPE. Think about all the different things that we really had never been in the business of operationalizing before. So thank goodness at Brookdale and with our partners and our residents and associates and families, we all came together to solve those issues together. And now we have new protocols. We've added new things to our emergency process that we've learned. That's another thing that we really are very focused on is, okay, this is the way it went. What did we do? How did it go? Can we apply that to any other process that we need to go forward with? So we've learned through the pandemic and applied those lessons to make it better for all of our residents and associates and families.
So that's great. You're able to build on a lot of what you already had, but then that new territory of like the pulse oximeters or other things that were new territory. And then it sounds like a lot of that are now some everyday best practices that are coming into play for any possible thing that comes up.
That's right. We're ready.
That's great.
Yes.
We're
And
ready.
You should date stamp that though, in case.
By the way, right? No, I'm not making bets with the world.
Yeah, no, let's keep it moving in the positive direction.
But
here,
that's how blizzards happen.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, Carol, when we think about the folks that were on the ground and all the people helping make this happen, how did the associates kind of help out with this? I mean, how did they approach the mental health needs of the residents?
Yeah, well, we've always had a strong focus, Janet, on residents' mental and emotional well-being. And of course, the pandemic brought challenges for all of us in that regard. But, one of the benefits for residents was the fact that even though they were staying home, they were in a community setting where people were around, and our associates worked so very hard to keep residents' spirits up, doing things like hallway carts with themes. Oh, you can see the picture there. All of the ways that we helped residents stay connected. We had engagement room service. So keeping residents engaged in ways that were meaningful to them, even though they could not gather in groups. And at a corporate level, we just banded together and created so many programs and resources on grief and loss, emotional and social well-being for residents, families, and associates. And in the wake of the pandemic, we've put together a task force, and we've called in a grief expert to help people process through the grief that we know we've all experienced. And while we may or may not have lost a person, we've lost many things through the pandemic. So we want to help people process that and just continue the work of supporting mental health through partnerships with providers and other resources as we come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's great. So it seems like this is going to kind of change how we think about mental as well as physical health going forward, right? I mean, that's going to kind of change how we approach all of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we learned so much about, and one of the benefits, or you talk about silver linings, we had a big focus on group programs in senior living, and the pandemic helped us focus more on individual engagement and helping residents figure out what they want to do, because not everybody wants to join a group, right? So that gave us a lot of opportunity to do that and to think about things in a new and different way.
Yeah, that's great. And, Sarah, you were talking earlier, we were talking about all the associates, and obviously that's stressful for them, right? They're becoming family and everything to people during this time. So Sarah, what kind of support was provided to our associates during the pandemic?
Yeah, so well said, Janet. They essential is the word, right? They essential to the safety and well-being of our residents. So our commitment is always to their safety and well-being as well, our associates. So from our associate compassion fund to delivering groceries, to making sure they had safe transportation to and from work, to giving them instructions on how to keep their family safe. right? When they returned home from work, how to travel safely to and fro, we called it, right? How to travel safely from our communities to their homes, and making sure that their family was as safe as possible, certainly because the stress was intense for every single person, right? But our mission and obligation and commitment was to support our associates, their well-being, to make sure that they were as supported and well taken care of during the pandemic as possible. Like I said, our Associate Compassion Fund was funded more than it ever was in 2020. And we gave, grants to our associates in need, and just, groceries, all, transportation, all different things. And then, our executive directors really having really good, candid conversations with the associates, being transparent, answering questions, right? And if the local community team didn't have the answers, we have all the expertise at Brookdale to help them get the answers, because the associates had equally as many questions as the residents and families did. So in making sure that we were transparent, answering questions with an ever evolving situation, right? I mean, that was, everybody's mentioned that we had to really stay on top of what the information was, and saying it's subject to change, right? We're still learning. This was a new virus, a novel virus. And we had to keep, evolving the education with the virus, and making sure that we were providing that information to our associates, residents, and families.
Yeah, they really were essential, right? And we've talked so much about that and just how critical they were to all of us surviving this, right?
That's right. That's right.
How does it shape what we're doing to support associates going forward, maybe?
I think it's just a reinforcement of the good core principles of supporting our associates. I think it's just a reinforcement and a renewed commitment to make sure that we're listening, serving, and supporting our associates equally as we do our residents and families, and making sure we understand their needs and how we can help them.
That's great.
And I really do feel like, our associates as a whole really told us that they felt that during this pandemic. And similar to our residents and families, we surveyed over 10,000 of our residents and families during the pandemic. And one of the things they said was they felt supported, they felt safe, and they felt engaged, which was kind of what you want, even though it was a very, very difficult time, right, for everyone.
Yep.
Yes.
But it mattered. It really mattered.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So for our audience, you can submit questions. A couple people have already dropped some questions, and please feel free to drop questions, and we'll get to the questions at the end. So please feel free to pop them in. And like I said, they'll sit there till the end, and we'll get to them and answer them in a little bit. One of the things, Carol, turning to you, one of the things that was really fun, and we did a whole webinar about this last summer, is technology and the new technology that residents learn to connect with friends and family. I mean, this has been like a global technology boom, right? I know my great aunt FaceTimed to me, was like, it's been in your phone forever, you didn't know. So can you talk a little bit about how these technologies really impacted the ways that we can connect with our communities and are going to moving forward?
Sure, absolutely. I think we all wish we'd have bought stock in Zoom, right, prior to the pandemic.
Oh, we'd be rich.
My family is all around the country, and we Zoomed with each other for the first time during the pandemic. And we said, why haven't we done this before? So there were, cool things that came out of it. We were fortunate that we already had iPads and Chromebooks in all of our communities. So we were ready to go, and we helped residents connect FaceTime and Zoom with their family members. And lots of people, as you said, your aunt, bought and used technology for the very first time. And that's, I think we see that a lot with seniors in general, that when they see how the technology helps them, then they get a little bit more interested in it. So we did help folks, access technology that way. I know we have a couple of pictures here. Sarah mentioned, or somebody mentioned, just the goodwill from the community that came during the pandemic. And here we have a gentleman, one of our residents from Florida, who was turning 102. And he was a lifelong Packers fan. And the Green Bay Packers were so gracious to have a couple of their players join him on a call and greet him and wish him a happy birthday. And you can just see the joy on his face there. And the joy on the woman's face, right, is just precious. She is speaking to her daughter and learning, this was a little bit more recent, she was learning that they were actually going to be able to visit with one another soon. And so she was just so happy and excited. So we see that, you know, people really did and do make connections via technology, and we'll continue to use that going forward for long distance family members. And, you know, we've also formed some great partnerships with virtual content providers. Like we have a partnership with a group that does live virtual tours of interesting travel sites. And so we'll continue with those going forward. I also want to just turn it to my colleague, Juliet, because I know you did a lot of things in the dementia care space with technology too.
Yeah, some of the same things. I think, you know, we had our residents in dementia care were actually some of our first residents to use, you know, technology and embrace technology about a decade ago. So we have resident use computers in all of our memory care programs. And so we were able to use those systems. You know, we were already using Skype and some of these other apps to help residents connect with families virtually. But boy, did that explode over the last year. And, you know, many of our coordinators spend a good deal of their time organizing those family visits. So, you know, we heard from families that they were seeing their residents more than they had previous, you know, and especially, you know, across many state lines and so forth. So, and I think we have a couple of pictures here as well from our Clarebridge communities. You know, this photo on the left is a woman in Chapel Hill who was in North Carolina and communicating with some UNC Chapel Hill students who were, I believe, a swim team or a tennis team, and she had been a swim champ kind of thing, and they were connecting, doing a musical activity together. Just an amazing thing. That is an example of one of our In Touch systems that, again, have been a normal part of our programming for around a decade. And then you see on the right some of the in-room engagement. I think a little lower tech, right? Some of the games and puzzles and kits that we were able to put in resident rooms as when the isolation, you know, was really in full force and folks were having to stay in their rooms. You can imagine in dementia care what a challenge that was. And, you know, so it really helped us to bring in things into the room, technology or otherwise, to help them, you know, remain in their rooms, but also be engaged.
Yeah.
You know, Juliet, you bring up a really good point, actually, connection. We did room service engagement in our independent living and assisted living. So we converted to, you know, like in a fine hotel room service, we did room service engagement. So the residents could fill out a door tag every day of things that they wanted, or a visit from a, you know, somebody from the community. You know, did they need a deck of cards? Did they want games? What were they did they need help with technology? It was a big hit. We called it room service engagement.
That's great. You know, shameless plug for a webinar we did last fall, summer, all about technology. So if you're not too sure about technology, we did a great webinar on that with some experts on how you could do that and introduce it to seniors, or if you just don't know a lot about it, and people with memory care issues. So that's on our website. I would check that out if you're interested in learning more about all the different technology out there. Juliet, you know, when it comes to our memory care communities, you know, specifically, are there ways that COVID-19 and the things that we've done made our programs better or stronger?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, listen, that there's no doubt about it that memory care, you know, that this was a challenge in memory care. You can just, you know, picture a dementia care community and then trying to contain folks and get folks to wash their hands and not touch their face. And, you know, there's just sort of all kinds of challenges. I think the silver lining for us in dementia care was really our ability to rest on our foundation of person-centered care. And I think had we not had that going through, this would have been a lot tougher for us. One of the things that really shone through has been our commitment to consistent assignment of care partners, which we've had again for over a decade now, where we have the same care associates taking care of the same residents day in and day out. That helped us a great deal. It helps us on a regular basis with clinical, you're going to notice something that's amiss with that resident much sooner, much, finer point to that observation if you know that person very well. So, we were able to detect any changes or early symptoms and really catch things quickly because of that consistent assignment. So I feel like our person-centered foundation, was relied upon heavily, but was also really strengthened. We saw those relationships between the care associates and the residents, that were already very, very strong, really turn into true partnerships. If that care associate was the only person coming in and out of that room, and when they were in isolation, it really was that lifeline. So I think that's, again, one of those silver linings that we looked at. I think we thought a lot about communication, and, when you're working with folks with dementia, boy, how your face looks is a big part of making sure that
Yes.
communication goes well, right? And so I think we really had to work, all right, we've got all this covered up now, pretty much just your eyes are showing how does that change the communication? So we looked at all kinds of dementia-friendly PPE, and we created resources around, all right, you've got all this stuff on. Now, what do you need to do extra to communicate really well with people living with the disease? So, we did some really interesting things with like putting pictures next to the name tags of the person's actual face, so the resident could still know and know who that person is and was behind all the PPEs. So
Yeah.
lots of interesting resources that we had to create specifically for dementia care.
It's interesting because the one theme, though, that you guys are all talking about is there was a strong foundation and we built on it, right? Like person-centered. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't have been able to build on that. So it's great. And that's one thing you guys have all kind of talked to, is that strong foundation and building on that. So now we're even better. So when the next thing comes along, right, we're ahead of it. So that's great.
The cicada bloom is coming up.
I can even say from a clinical standpoint, I felt like the nurses, the clinical team was very good at infection control and prevention. Because we deal with flu outbreaks, right? That occurs depending on the flu season or a GI outbreak, that type of thing. So I think that we will forever be changed because we've learned so much. It's like, if we can keep COVID out of the community, we can keep flu out of the community.
Yeah, right.
I think the acceptance of a flu vaccine, for example, the vaccine is available before your flu season hits. So you can get it ahead of time. We didn't have that luxury with COVID. We had to deal with COVID, and then the vaccine became available. So I think there's been a lot of lessons learned from, my area as well, that we've learned from it and will always be better because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, before we open up to questions, I would love for each one of you, I'll call each of you, share a lesson that you're going to take away from the past year, right? The silver linings is great. I love that thought. As we're coming out of it, share a lesson. Carol, why don't we start with you? What's a lesson you're going to take away from the past year?
Janet, I would say the power of us. I am so incredibly proud, and I could get tearful, of the work that our associates in our communities have done through the pandemic. I'm always proud of them, but just to see how people rallied together, and those of us in the corporate team, and the work that people did, and everybody just moving together for the same purpose and the same cause, there's really no limit to what we can accomplish. And it's just a great lesson to have reinforced.
That's nice. I like that. The power of us. Kim, how about you? What's a lesson you're going to take away from the past year?
Mine was similar to Carol, but it's never underestimate the abilities of someone with a compassionate heart. And that is, again, I thought that we had, I knew we had top talent. We have a mission-driven company, and we have mission-driven associates. And I had no doubt that they would perform. but they blew us away, because it was, you would talk to nurses that were working. They stayed around the clock. They slept there at the community because they weren't going to leave. And they did not want COVID to come into their community. And it was at a time when it was so exhausting and just overwhelming. And you've got, families and everyone calling. They were on a mission. And that mission was to keep them safe. And that was just amazing. But the other thing, since Mom was so close to Carol's answer there, I think the information processing is something, staying informed is something that we said all through the pandemic. And I think that I'll always see that a little differently, because there's never a time so much information was coming, and you couldn't read one article, because if you read one article, you could find 5 that says something completely different. And then you've got 6 people sending you articles that they saw or they read one article. So I think the whole process of, when you're in a situation like that, how to process the information, how to make informed decision, how to find the evidence-based practice, where to go, using your resources. So professionally, that's the lesson learned that will, forever stick with me as we go forward.
That's great. I couldn't get you off, couldn't get myself on mute. Yeah, like I can't even imagine you, like everyone had so much coming at us, and in your position, it's like even more technical coming from everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah, right. Juliet, how about you?
Yeah, I would say, there's been so much talk as we're, on the other side of this pandemic, hopefully, about resilience. And I think we've had, really a lot of time to think about, what does resilience mean? What does it look like? We've got to see so many great examples of people managing really stressful situations. And we learned, right? I mean, this was a year-long, high intensity, high stress. We really learned how to manage, I think, our own health and those types of things through this. But the true mentors in resilience are always the residents. It's always the adults. And, they've been through it all. And, these remarkable stories of people that are in their, hundreds and, vaccine, of course, roll up their sleeve, they're ready to go. So, I think to really look to the elders always for the lessons, that they're the true mentors in this situation, getting through this situation.
Oh, absolutely, especially with resilience. It's like they've seen everything. They don't freak out the way the rest of us do all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Sarah, how about you? A lesson from the last year?
Great. Well, I agree with what Carol, Kim, and Juliet have already mentioned, of course. But to me, I think the lesson really is, we knew, kind of like I said before, engagement was important. It's more important than ever. The same with communication and the varying definitions of what that means, pandemic or not, to our residents and our associates and our families, and the lessons we need to continue to apply to ensure we're using every channel we have, every associate we have, to make sure communication is wide open. The other thing I would say is transparency. We've always been transparent, but I think transparency became very critical to our residents, our associates, and families during this. If we didn't know the answer at the time, we said we didn't know the answer at the time, we would have to figure out. Kim, I was thinking back to when you and Jacqueline, we had open emails where Kim and Jacqueline were answering like 300 emails a day from associates with their questions. And of course, that continues today with vaccines, right? Asking questions and getting good quality answers from Kim and the clinical team, their healthcare provider, anybody that, that they trust to get, information about the vaccine. So I would say communication and transparency, it's a lesson. And the lesson really is the stronger commitment to those two pieces, communication and transparency.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you. All right, we are at the Q&A part. It is time to hear from all of you. We welcome all of your questions. For Carol, Kim, Juliet, and Sarah, to ask your question, again, look for the Q&A icon at the bottom of the webinar screen. If you're on Facebook, just put it in the comments, and then we will see your questions and respond. And we're going to get to as many questions as we can. And don't worry, like I said, you are all going to get a follow-up email with all of this information, as well as a recording of this webinar, You can refer back to it later, or you could share it with your family and friends. So our first question, actually, Juliet, is for you. How was the pandemic explained to residents in memory care, and how updates continue to be communicated to those facing memory loss? That's got to be a tough one.
Yeah, I think, it wasn't as hard as you might imagine. I think, again, that resiliency and a resident's ability, to pivot and go with the flow never ceases to amaze me. I do think where we could explain the situation, we did, where we felt like there was going to be, comprehension of what a virus and a pandemic, means. I think we always are, on the side of being transparent with our residents as well. There's no reason to keep that kind of stuff from folks. I do recall one of our first communities where we used outside cleaning, hygienists to come in and do deep cleaning in the communities. We had a resident who referred to them and said, "Thank God the moon men are here," because they were in full suit, with the contamination suits and all of that. So, again, I think their humor and their understanding level is always perhaps more than we think it is. And, they understood masks, they got used to the PPE. And where we could, we had those honest conversations and had those real conversations.
That's great. All right, the next question is, what is Brookdale doing to encourage associates to get vaccinated? Who would like to take that one?
Kim or I can take it, or we
Yeah,
both can take it. Yeah.
You both take it. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Kim, if you want to kick off.
Sure. So education. I mean, that has been a strategy all along. Creating a culture of vaccine acceptance. We have talked openly from the very beginning and answered many, many questions. As Sarah said, we have done educational videos, you name it. And we've taken that to our associates to make sure that they're making that, informed decision, and we're doing everything we can to protect the residents.
That's right. That's right.
That's great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Janet. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just going to say, we have another question. Are Brookdale associates going to continue to wear masks for the near future?
So we very strictly follow the CDC guidelines. So as of now, yes, in healthcare environments and settings, due to the risk that our residents are at with their age, healthcare workers wear masks. So I do not see that going away anytime soon, but I can tell you that we will continue to watch the CDC guidance and make sure that, we don't make that decision until it's safe to make that decision.
That's great. Okay, I've got kind of a long question. Communication between Brookdale and families needed some improvement before the pandemic. Are there plans now to establish online community portals to post policy or messaging updates, anything like that, or some kind of email distribution list for the community, anything like that going to be set up?
Yeah, so we set up the Brookdale newsroom was in play before the pandemic. We use it to post any kind of updates during hurricanes, wildfires, snowstorms, all those things. And we direct our residents and families to go to the website if they're computer savvy. And then certainly give the community tools with templates for letters to residents and families. We started with text during the pandemic. We started texting our associates, our leadership, to give them updates, which was very effective. I think we sent 2 series of those. We're looking at a lot of different options. It's kind of back to what I was saying on my lessons learned of communication. Every and all channels, Zoom meetings with families became commonplace, leveraging all kinds of technology, because what we find is probably just like what this person who's asking the question is, what one person is using for communication, the other person is not using. We need multi-channel. And so we have several channels now, but we are constantly looking for additional channels. And text was one of those that we leveraged during the pandemic. But that brookdalenews.com is a great place to go to get updates on everything going on at Brookdale. But we certainly used it, all of our videos about the pandemic, all of our videos about what's going on in the communities. As we find in wildfires and hurricanes, though, we post specific about the communities affected. And in the pandemic, we had to go more broad. because it was affecting all of our communities.
Yeah.
But appreciate the feedback. It just continues to reinforce our commitment to communication and what that means. I will say what that means to every single person.
Yeah, you said that earlier. Communication means something different to everyone, and that is so true. It's a
It
good
is true.
point. So true.
You can send one person email, they don't read it. If you send them a text, they respond in 32 seconds, right? It's very interesting and like we are. I mean, communication is kind of ageless, right? It's lots of different methods, and certainly our residents, many of them still like to get the printed letter from the ED, in their mailbox every day, or those types of things. So we understand communication is critical, and we need to continue to leverage every single source of communication.
No, that's
I
great.
think there's an old quote, I can't remember who it's attributed to, but it says the problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Right?
I love
That's
that.
it.
Oh my God,
That's
Carol,
it.
I love that.
That's right. That's
But
right.
then, someone hasn't received it, as Sarah said, in a way that they want or need to receive it.
Well,
yeah,
and
I love
what we found in the pandemic is when I don't know what the CAT scans were or whatever showing, but I think everybody's brains were so into trying to learn so much so fast and trying to interject something, or we found if somebody heard it 2 weeks ago but it changed, it was still 2 weeks ago, right? We have to bring people forward, right, to what's happening now. And so that's a really interesting thing to try to do with a large population.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, Juliet, this might be you. I'm not sure. Do you know when family members will be able to go back into Clare Bridge facilities to visit?
Well, I'll defer as well to Kim and Sarah on that, but I think, that's right now it's state by state, correct? Would that?
Right, and we
answer
have
that
all of our
correctly?
states open. All of our states are currently open for friends and family visits unless there's a positive case. Most, if not all, communities are open to friends and family visits. So,
Yeah, the only time it would not be is if a Department of Health or the
Correct.
state
Yeah.
has told them that they have concerns that there could be, potential outbreak and that they do not want visitors. But besides that,
mhm.
it's definitely not a Brookdale protocol.
Got it. So
Yeah,
I think-
we just saw some terrific reunions on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
You haven't checked out our video for Mother's Day. It's a daughter surprising her mom, and the resident says, or the daughter says to her, I know you don't like surprises, but how about this one? And she surprised her, and they reunited and hugged, and after not seeing each other for a long period of time. So
that's
it was-
great.
it was awesome.
That's great. We have a couple people asking about getting into C. So I think everyone else asking, you have to check with your local community to find out what the rules are there. So we have a few people asking, and
Yes.
so because we've got people from all over the country, you kind of got to call and check locally to know. Here's a question. Are Brookdale residents able to go to offsite activities currently?
Yes. Yes, we have, one unique thing about Brookdale is every one of our communities has a Facebook page as well. So we all like to look and take a window in and see what our residents are up to. And of course, we hear it through our teams, but we have residents going, the buses are rolling again. Of course, that was right about the time the pipeline went down. So we used our partners to get the gas and everything. But yes, residents are able to go out with family and friends, or going out on outings with the community for sure. Yeah,
It really has been
it's
a
wonderful to
series
see. It's wonderful to see our residents out in the greater community. That's one thing people don't think about is our residents want to be part of the greater community and engaged in what's going on in their community. And it's great to see them going out again.
It has been a series of crazy, you're totally, the pipeline and cicadas, like there's just
That's right.
constantly one more thing that might impact things.
That's right. So
Is Brookdale planning to have any big reopening events?
I think our communities are certainly, we've seen some videos where they're opening the doors and friends and families are coming back in. But I think I don't know about big events. It's more like just really making that personal connection, renewing that family, power of touch and connection, and reuniting with their families. And certainly, the communities celebrate in their own unique ways and very personalized. I think the vaccine clinics saw the big kind of more event type things, but I think the family and friends coming back in is that power of connection and seeing their loved ones again or their friends again. And, it's emotional experience, right? It has been for many of us, and it is for our residents as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of that's gone a little slowly, or at least metered, right? There was a time when we were coming out of isolation that we had to think about sort of the re-socialization. People were a little shy to come out of their rooms, and folks were struggling a little bit to get back into, and at that point, of course, we were still social distance. We were still really, mindful. So it's all been, sort of at step by step, right? But a slower process. And I know, I think that's true for all of us. I just made my first trip to a grocery store a week ago, so I think as we're all getting vaccinated and, the world's kind of waking up and opening up again. And the same is true for our residents. It's a metered reintroduction, right, into some of these activities that were so plentiful before. So.
Yeah, that's true.
The salons being open, which they've been for quite a while, and swimming pools and fitness centers and all the different things.
Everything we all missed. They missed.
That's right.
Too,
That's right.
Oh my gosh. Here's a great, well, first of all, folks on Facebook asking how to ask questions, just go ahead and put them in the comments. Our Facebook visitors, please put your questions right in the comments and we'll see them. So go ahead and do that. That's the right way to submit questions there. Everyone else, use your Q&A button on Zoom. This is a great question that's just come in too. We talked about mental health and our associates. Mental health has been at the forefront of all this, resiliency, mental health, all that. It's nice to hear this person says that all the support for the associates with mental health. Is this going to continue to be a priority at Brookdale?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think it just may have said it a little differently earlier, but just reinforced the commitment that we do have to our associates.
Mm-hmm.
Another, I think, silver lining of COVID is that telehealth has become more prevalent, and many insurance carriers are covering that now. And so that opens a new option too for mental health services.
That's a great point, Carol.
Yeah, that really is. Here's a good question. I know that a positive, I think they mean COVID positive, will probably be rare with the current vaccination rate, but how is quarantine going to be handled now if that does happen?
That is a good question. And we recently just redid we have a playbook that all of our teams use on how to manage it. But the way that it was managed pre-vaccination clinics is a quarantine. It often did shut down a community because if people weren't vaccinated, we had to protect those coming in. We had to protect ours from, getting COVID, and we had to get that under control. The good thing about the vaccination is, yes, number one, it's very rare, but the management will be that person, in their room. That's how the quarantine. So it's, instead of it impacting the entire community because there's a positive case, it will impact that resident in that room and follow the guidelines of the CDC. So the only exception to that is if the Department of Health were to actually come in and say, no, maybe you should close down to all visitors. And if that's the case, then we work with our health regulatory agencies and do as they suggest.
That's great. Somebody put this in, I think it's great. As Juliet mentioned, some residents are feeling shy coming out of isolation. I understand the feeling too as an adult child. This would be a great topic for a webinar. I agree.
Yes, it would be.
Yeah,
it would be.
Like not wearing a mask. It's like you get all crazy. It's like all of these, right? We've grown so accustomed to stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.
Right. Somebody else is asking when fully vaccinated volunteers might be allowed back in the facilities to help with programs.
And that's pretty much under the friends and family, but it's best to check with the local community on that in case there's any local or state regulatory guidance on that.
All right.
But I know we do have volunteers and entertainers and lecturers coming back in. So.
Got it. That's great.
Yep.
And then another person's asking, when are we going to be able to get back into our family's actual room, not just the facility meeting room?
So that's an interesting thing that happened during the pandemic as well. Some states, if it was a regulated community AL memory care, they decided that having a room, with all apologies to anybody whose family member works in a state regulatory agency. Our best suggestion was that they always went to the resident apartment because we felt that was the safest place. But in some states, they regulated that it had to be a common room to meet in. So then we would clean it in between visits. So that would come down to the state regulatory guidance changing. And wherever we can, we are supporting and encouraging the actual visits in the residents' apartments. But there may be continuing state regulatory guidance that guides that, Janet. So that's not a Brookdale guidance. That's a state regulatory guidance.
Got it.
Kim and Juliet and Carol and I retire. We're gonna have a little fun writing protocols.
Fun writing protocols. I've never heard that, Ellen.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Here's another great question coming in. Are there ways to volunteer without being on site?
Yeah, I think certainly, again, technology has really opened up abilities to connect folks with our residents. And, we have all kinds of intergenerational groups that are happening now that weren't before. We have support groups that are happening now that weren't before, because it's nothing for people to hop on a Zoom these days. Whereas even in the beginning of the pandemic, most people outside of business hadn't really been on a Zoom call before, right? So absolutely, we're using all kinds. My favorite volunteer story from the pandemic was a local stable who brought out the horses for window visits to the residents through the windows. The horses were looking in the windows. It was fabulous. But so yes, there's all kinds of things that we just encourage you to reach out to your local community to see how you can volunteer.
That's so well said, Juliet. Go ahead, Carol.
The student groups, the Picture UNC,
Yes.
students were calling and talking with residents.
Yep.
And those calls. And also we had a group, Project Isaiah, I think it was called, and
Yes.
it may still be happening. We're sending letters and notes to residents.
Yes.
So there have been some pen pals that have kind of formed as a result of that. So lots of creative ways to.
Lots of creative ways. We've actually had some interesting connections too. I saw you last week, Jake Owen, the real good country music star, was FaceTiming in with one of our residents at Riverwalk. Somebody made the connection. And so the power of technology continues to have, endless possibilities, I would say.
Yes.
Endless.
It's such a great takeaway too, because it really helps with isolation. I mean, it's helped all of us so much. Who knew? And we've had it, we just weren't using it. So that's great.
That's right.
So Carol, Kim, Juliet, and Sarah, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all of our folks in the audience for being here, for asking your questions. We're going to email you again a recording and a transcript of this webinar. You can view it again or share it with your family and friends. And we ask that you please join us for our next webinar. I'm really excited about this one. On Wednesday, June 16th at 3 p.m. The subject is going to be creativity in the brain, and it's going to feature some Brookdale residents. I'm a creative person. I'm like all jazzed about this one. So please join us for this webinar featuring a few of our creative residents and the younger artists they mentored as part of our Great Create video series. You can register right now at brookdale.com/intheknow. You can also go back on our website and look at future or previous topics and see all the different subjects, including that one on technology. Do not miss it. You will learn something. So visit brookdale.com/intheknow to learn more. And we do hope to see you again soon. And thank you all. Until next time, we hope you all stay safe, happy, and well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.